listener production.
Have you ever been curious to learn more about you and your family's history? Maybe as part of that curiosity, you spit into a test tube and sent it off for DNA testing. Millions and millions of people have done it, but a new investigation has uncovered claims it could all be part of a massive exercise in exploitation.
What I found was a story about a guy who joined all of these dots: the Mormon Church, policing, and identification through DNA. And his DNA had implicated him in a crime in the US that was 3,000 kilometres across the country.
Later in this ep, I talk to the team behind Listener's brand new Secrets We Keep podcast, Should I Spit, about their incredible investigation. It's so worth a listen. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiro on Tuesday, February 4.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. As the pollies get back to work for 2025 in Canberra today, the Australian Electoral Commission has dropped just how much the parties made from donors last year. Labor raked in $67.5 million in political donations over the 2023-24 financial year, while the coalition scored $73.5 million, with billionaires, fossil fuel and gambling companies and unions topping the list of givers. But the source of much of this money is unknown because of the current disclosure laws, which Labor is trying to change in Parliament. It means that if a donor wants to remain anonymous, they just have to split their contributions into $16,200 chunks.
Yeah, the government failed to win Senate support for that bill last year. Crossbenchers did like the transparency aspect, but they were against the proposed expenditure caps, claiming that they would benefit the bigger parties. Look, as for what the independents and crossbenchers received in donations last financial year, we know the Greens raised $17.1 million, while the group Climate 200, which finances the Teal independents, made about $6 million. Pauline Hanson's One Nation, meantime, collected $2 million. And as we mentioned at the top of this story, Chris, MPs and senators are back in Canberra today to kick off the first sitting fortnight of Parliament for 2025. And that'll all start at 7:30am with the traditional ecumenical church service. So we did deep dive yesterday afternoon, just what we can expect from this first 2 weeks of Parliament. That's in the feed now if you want to go have a listen. And look, also today, to coincide with the start of the parliamentary sitting year, we do have a new Guardian Essential poll that has been released today. Possibly a blow for Albo. More than 60% of respondents from this particular survey thought that he was out of touch with ordinary Aussies. In comparison, 55% of people thought the same of Peter Dutton. While when it comes to the anti-Semitism issue, which we know is going to dominate federal parliament over the next couple of weeks, Australians had split opinions about how the Albanese government has dealt with the increasing issue. 43% of voters thought the government had not done enough, while 39% believe it had done enough or had done too much. So kind of seems to be one of those issues where once again we're seeing people split right down the middle.
To the UK now, where Sam Kerr has appeared for her first day of a criminal trial, accused of racially aggravated harassment of a police officer. The Matilda's captain has pleaded not guilty to the charges over an incident during a night out in 2023. It's alleged Kerr and her partner had been taken to a London police station by a taxi driver who complained the pair had refused to pay clean-up costs after one of them was sick and that one of them had smashed the vehicle's rear window. According to police, it was there that the Chelsea star allegedly became abusive and insulting towards an officer, with footage of his body cam played to the jury showing her saying, "Honestly, you guys are f***ing stupid and white."
Honestly, you guys are f***ing stupid and white.
Okay.
I'm looking you in the eyes.
Why are you
I'm
being
looking you in the
racist?
eyes. Like
So-
that's f***ing stupid.
The jury was told the comments left the officer feeling shocked, upset and humiliated. Kerr's lawyer says they're not disputing the words, but rather the meaning behind them. The 31-year-old is expected to take to the stand at some point during the 5-day trial, which continues later today.
There are hopes Donald Trump's trade war with Mexico, Canada and China could be averted after he paused his levies on the US's southern neighbour. So Trump has met with the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, with both putting out a statement shortly after confirming a month-long pause on the 25% tariff that had been imposed on Mexico. The US president saying he would instead work on a deal with his Mexican counterpart after she agreed to send 10,000 of the country's troops to the border immediately. Their focus on preventing fentanyl trafficking and illegal immigration, which had been what sparked, apparently, Donald Trump's crusade to put these tariffs on Mexico specifically, was illegal immigration and the fentanyl trade. Sheinbaum also agreed to halt retaliatory tariffs that she had already announced. Now, it's understood that in exchange, the US would do more to stop the trafficking of assault weapons into Mexico. So the tariffs on Canada and China are due to come into effect on Tuesday, US time, which will be overnight into tomorrow for us. But they could also be avoided because Trump is going to hold urgent talks with Canada's PM Justin Trudeau this morning. And as for official word from Beijing, we have heard from its Commerce Ministry, which has said the 10% tax violates World Trade Organization rules and it would likely file a lawsuit. But a more official response from China is expected once Lunar New Year celebrations wrap up. So we're just waiting to hear from them and to see whether Trump and Trudeau can have any sort of can reach a deal like we saw with Mexico.
The Grammy goes to Cowboy Carter, Beyonce.
Yes, we're wrapping up today with the top moments from the Grammys, which happened yesterday, Arvo. Beyonce finally taking home Album of the Year. It's the first time she's won the gong despite being nominated and winning the most Grammys of any artist ever.
I just feel very full and very honored. It's been many, many years.
She also won Best Country Album for the record. The other big winners, Kendrick Lamar taking home all 5 gongs he was nommed for, including Record and Song of the Year.
Yeah, newcomer Sabrina Carpenter also picked up a couple at her first ever Grammys. She got Best Pop Vocal Album and Best Pop Solo Performance, while Chappell Roan took home the other biggie, Best New Artist.
The Grammy Award for Best New Artist goes to
Chappell Roan! Now, we are no stranger to artists and actors getting on their soapboxes when they accept their awards and telling us ordinary people what we should do and how we should be better. And she did, I think, choose a better moment to campaign for something. This is what she had to say to the big record labels.
I would demand that labels and the industry profiting millions of dollars off of artists would offer a livable wage and health care, especially to developing artists.
Yes. We're all clicking in artistic support. Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish were both snubbed despite being favourites to take out awards with multiple nominations each. But in good news, Aussie boys Tame Impala picked up a gong for Best Dance or Electronic Recording.
Yay, go the boys. Overall, I thought it was a pretty uncontroversial, feel-good night.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just felt like there were... I don't know. I just got good vibes from it. However, there was one big caveat to that, and that was this weird stunt pulled by Kanye West and his Aussie wife, Bianca Censori. So she showed up. They both showed up to the red carpet. They walked the red carpet. Yes. She was wearing this big coat, and then he kind of whispered in her ear, and she took it down, and she was wearing a sheer dress. You can't even really call it a dress. It looks like a piece of see-through fabric.
Like stocking. It looked like a stocking, a full-body stocking.
And she was completely nude underneath. They were both booted from the event because it appears that they weren't actually invited. Yeah. They were kicked out. It was very weird.
It's moments like these that I actually find gravity in the conspiracy theories that Kanye West is now a clone. Because this is not human behaviour. This makes no sense to me.
That is not where I expected you to go with that.
I'm so sorry. I had to enter the conspiracies there.
Some viewers were also miffed that they were being asked, because this was a big fundraiser event as well for LA emergency workers after, of course, the devastating fires that the city saw just a couple of weeks ago. But viewers were taken to socials during the event because they were asked to donate. And they were like, read the room. Look at who is in that room. Yeah. All these billionaires and millionaires and powerful powerful people, and you're telling us ordinary folk at home to donate. So there was a little bit of, argy-bargy over that. However, there was a really nice tribute to the emergency workers which kicked off the event. And in an unprecedented moment, LA firefighters who were dressed in full uniform were also invited on stage to present the Album of the Year award, which, as we know, went to Beyonce. So I think overall it was a pretty nice night. Chris, thank you so much. Next up, we are getting into our deep dive, asking, should you spit? Stay tuned for that one. If you're a true crime fan or have watched any police shows, you're probably familiar with DNA, which is often portrayed as this kind of magical silver bullet that puts the bad guys behind bars. But what if you were pulled into a police interrogation room, accused of a cold case murder that happened 3,000 k's away, only to be told that somehow DNA linked you to the crime scene? The rise of family history databases have given police a new tool in identifying people, but it doesn't always lead them in the right direction. Today, investigative reporter Claire Aird launches a major new listener podcast, Secrets We Keep, Should I Spit? Diving deep into the DNA industry and how it's changing policing as we know it. Claire, welcome to the briefing.
G'day.
This is a wild story. It involves family history, DNA testing, police, and the Mormon Church. How did you come to this story?
So I was drinking coffee, as I usually am, and I just came across this research that said in a few years' time, pretty much now, almost all Americans with European ancestry would be identifiable by DNA that a relative had uploaded to one of these family history type databases.
So are we talking sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, like those sort of websites?
Those sort of tests, but once you take that information from one of those tests that you've done and upload it to a more open source public website. So if you can't find your relatives on those bigger ones, then you go to these other ones. And so just by the vast amount of people doing these kind of family history tests to find out if they're a little bit Italian or maybe a bit Viking, we are almost all of us, identifiable. And it kind of blew my mind. At the time, I was doing a cybersecurity podcast, so I'm thinking a lot about data privacy. And I sort of started thinking about how our genetic data is being used. It's not something that I'd ever considered. So how it can be hacked, bought, sold, and how it can identify people without their consent. And the man whose research this was a Columbia University professor, Dr. Yaniv Elric. And he kind of confirmed a hunch that I had, that DNA is like no other identifying information. We'll have a listen to what he said.
There are several unique things about genetic privacy. The first thing is that your DNA is immutable, right? It's you born with it, you cannot change it. It's not like your credit card. It's not like your address. It's not like your phone number. It's immutable. The second thing, which is even more powerful about genetic privacy, is that I don't need you in my database in order to identify you.
Which is kind of this wild concept, and that's because DNA is shared, right? So you actually only need about 1% to 2% of the population in a database to identify everyone.
Wow.
It got me thinking about these family history type tests. And I found out that 30 million people have done one of these. I don't know, maybe you have?
I haven't, but I have been tempted. I have, because I love history and I love tracing roots and that idea of trying to figure out who you are. And I've always say, I'm so white, I'm so boring. Like maybe if I did an Ancestry.com test, I'd find some Viking or something interesting. And I understand the appeal that it's so broad.
Yeah, and you're thinking, are there any family secrets? What else could I learn? And so it got me interested in the DNA industry. And I found that it has deep roots in the Mormon Church, which is something I did not expect.
Tell us more about that. Why is there such a big prevalence of the Church of Latter-day Saints, better known as the Mormons? How have they become such an important player in the DNA industry?
Yeah, so they're like these world leaders in genealogy, which is essentially the study of family history. You're like, okay, so why are they so interested in family history? part of their religion and part of their beliefs is that the family unit is the most important unit within their communities, within their religion. And you have to be baptized to have eternal life, okay? So if you're a Mormon and you're baptized, you can have eternal life. Great. But what if there's someone in your family who's not? Then you can't all be together forever. So the idea is this posthumous baptism for the dead. So somebody can stand in as a proxy for a dead relative that you found through family history research, and they can be baptized after death, and then you can all be together forever.
Right.
And so Mormons are fascinated by family history and have become the biggest record collectors in the world. So birth certificates, death certificates, all that kind of information that helps you build your family tree. And then DNA came along. So already they were using paper records to trace family. And then they found this biological record that would give you even more information. So they are key players in the DNA testing industry for family history as well.
Okay, so they had that interest. Was that then something that has led to the Mormon Church having a stake in these companies and in these databases, or is it more that so much of the data belongs to people who are Mormon or part of the Church of Latter-day Saints?
I'm going to say that you need to listen to the podcast
to
hear the answer to that question. But so the Mormons have kind of worked out this unbelievable way of identifying people, okay, which is incredible. It's not a stretch to think, okay, if I can use this for family history purposes, that police might want to use this to find criminals or identify people as part of an investigation. So that was my next line of inquiry. What I found was a story about a guy who joined all of these dots: the Mormon Church, policing, and identification through DNA. And his DNA had implicated him in a crime in the US that was 3,000 kilometres across the country. And I just had to meet this guy.
And so where did you go to meet him and what happened?
So,
well, without giving too much away, without killing the podcast.
I'll try not to. So I'm 3 months pregnant and I kind of think it's now or never. And I just felt at the time, I need to know more about this story, because this method of using family history databases to identify people is being rolled out in Australia currently by police here. So I thought, if I meet him, I might be able to learn some things. So I bought a plane ticket and I meet this guy in Salt Lake City. Michael is, I want to say, early 40s, and once upon a time he was a horror filmmaker.
Okay.
So you can maybe imagine that when police started to look at this guy because his DNA linked him to a crime scene, they started looking at his filmography, which included a film about a murder. So there were all these bizarre circumstances that added to police suspicions about him. But this guy, just one day, hanging out with his parents, he gets a phone call from police. We want to talk to you about a hit and run at a nearby park. Can you come down to the station? What he actually learns in that room is that his DNA has linked him to a crime years and years before. What police didn't tell him in that room is that they'd taken the DNA from the crime scene and they couldn't find a match in their own criminal databases. So they tried something very new. This was in 2016, a family history database. And it was the very first time that police had gone to Ancestry.com with a warrant saying, you give us the information of that person's DNA.
Wow. So the title of this podcast is Should I Spit? And, you know, when you first hear that, your brain might go to a few different places, but it's all becoming clearer, right? So, I mean, I guess the first question is, do we know if Michael actually had done one of these tests himself, and how police linked him to this crime?
Well, this is the wild part of Michael's story. He'd never done an Ancestry.com test. and no one in his family that he knew of had done an Ancestry.com test. So how on earth did they have this kind of information linking him to the crime? And that's part of the journey.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us if he had anything to do with the crime? Or do we have to tune in to find out?
You have to tune in to find out.
So you talked about how this is technology that's being used or about to be used in Australia. What do we know about that? What have you found out while producing this podcast?
So it is being used. So as part of this podcast, I spent hours with the New South Wales Police and the Australian Federal Police down at their lab in Canberra. And they're moving ahead with what they call new DNA capabilities, which includes using family history databases to identify people as part of an investigation into either, for example, a murder, or it could be a missing persons case as well, when all other avenues of investigation have been exhausted. They're also using what's called DNA phenotyping. Now, this was another thing that was so fascinating to me to learn about as I was making this podcast, is that police can take DNA, they don't know who the owner is, and from that, they can determine the traits that someone might have, what they might look like, brown hair, brown eyes. For example, they can learn what someone's biogeographic ancestry might be, so generally what part of the world they might come from, even down to the granular, like the distance between their eyes.
Wow.
So police in Australia, as in many other countries around the world, are pushing ahead with these new DNA technologies, which takes DNA from this basic tool of identification, right? You get some DNA, you try to match it to somebody else's DNA. Is that the person we're looking for? Into what they call an intelligence space. So it's generating leads before the start of an investigation, which has the potential to radically change the way they do their job.
Catching bad guys is one thing, and obviously that's an important part of our society and what our police are here to do. But how is this even legal? Because when you're supplying this DNA, this data, essentially, you're not doing it with the intention of it going into a police database or whatever. You're doing it with the intention of finding out where you came from and what your ancestry is. So is there anything in the disclaimers where it says, oh, this DNA might be used to catch criminals?
Yeah, so two things I would say. The big sites like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, for example, do not allow routine police searches of their databases. Police can access the information with a warrant, but they have to go to court. However, there are two other big databases which do allow police searching, gedmatch.com and Family Tree DNA. Now, the issue here is that you might have consented to upload your DNA information into one of these databases to assist police because you personally think that is a good thing to do. But what about your sister, your second cousin, out to your sixth cousin?
Wow.
Who I challenge you. Do you know who that is?
Nope. No idea.
And the other point I want to make is that police in Australia can do this because the legislation is silent. So it doesn't say that you can't and it doesn't say that you can. I think there needs to be a public conversation about whether or not this is something that we want.
Okay, so obviously this podcast series is going to bring up so many questions around ethics and should I or shouldn't I? And of course it launches today exclusively on the Listener app. But I guess before I let you go, Claire, I have to ask, should I spit?
Only you can answer that question for yourself.
Okay.
Things to think about is that when you spit, it's not just your information that you're giving away to what kind of company, who knows. Where might that data go afterwards? Companies get bought, sold, taken over. It's also your family's information. So I think this is something that challenges us because a lot of the time we look at issues from an individual lens. How does this affect me? When I think the question is more, how does this affect all of us?
Okay, Claire Aird, thank you so much for joining us today and for talking us through your new podcast, Should I Spit?
No worries.
That was Claire Aird, host of the newest investigative season of Listeners' Secrets We Keep, Should I Spit, speaking with me there. You can listen to Should I Spit exclusively on Listener from today and across all streaming platforms from the 6th of March. Just search Secrets We Keep, Should I Spit. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. Before you go, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And check out our socials. We're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sasha Barbagat. See you next time.
Listener.